counting down to catastrophe. Poverty plagues Afghanistan as millions risk starvation. The UN begs for urgent humanitarian relief, but can and will world powers come to the aid of civilians with the Taliban in charge? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis. The scenes of suffering are beyond description. And while world powers debate whether to recognize the Taliban as the official government of Afghanistan, Afghan children are starving to death.
My children want food. They cry because there's no food. In addition to that, we have no clothes.
Well, Afghanistan is on the brink of becoming the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Drought, war, and the Taliban takeover have all played a role in the unfolding catastrophe, and the UN has warned that unless the world acts quickly, it will spiral out of control.
So right now we have 18.8 million people who are determined to be food insecure in Afghanistan. And that number is ultimately rising in the next couple of months during the harshest period of the winter to 22.8 million people. That's over half of the population.
Worried their money would prop up the Taliban, several Western institutions, including the World Bank, IMF, and EU, have suspended funding. Humanitarian groups were already struggling to help those in need, but the decision to cut aid further endangered the most vulnerable. In September, with a crisis looming, the UN hosted a donor conference raising $1 billion. And just 2 weeks ago, the European Union pledged another $1.15 billion. But according to the UN's World Food Program, that money will save lives only if it translates into the actual delivery of food.
We can't feed people on promises. Funding commitments must turn into hard cash, and the international community must come together to address this crisis, which is fast spinning out of control.
To get more on the situation on the ground now, let's cross to Soraya Lennie. She joins us from Kabul. Hi, Soraya. You know, poverty, it's always crippled Afghanistan, but the difference now is that aid has stopped with the depths of winter just a few months away. Is there a real sense of fear now about how much worse this could get?
Well, absolutely, because snow has already fallen on the Salang Pass. It's a very famous part of the country, and it's also part of the Hindu Kush. And it won't be long before that snow reaches other parts of the country, and the weather's already getting incredibly cold and making life very difficult for people who are living rough, basically living on the streets, homeless, and living in those sorts of IDP tents in parks and other parts of the country, for example. And there's also that report, of course, from the UN and the UN's World Food Program, which predicts in just a few weeks' time in November, more than half the Afghan population could be facing acute food shortages. That's more than 22.8 million people, and includes around 3 million children. So there were figures that came out from the last government that showed even before this Taliban takeover and the collapse of the government in August, more than 50% of the Afghan population was living in poverty, and more than 90% of the population was living on less than $2 a day. Now, those predictions, of course, have gotten much worse, as you say, with the flight of foreign aid and foreign dollars in this trickle-down economy. It really just shows how precarious the Afghan economy has been over the past 20 years, that it could effectively collapse in just 2 months.
You know, as for those displaced people, you've said they've chosen migration over starvation already. What is happening to them in Kabul? And I mean, is escaping the country an option for anyone if they have no money and borders are being reinforced?
Well, absolutely, that's a great question. It's really only people who had connections or some kind of money. Most of the people who managed to flee the country in those, Qatar Airways and those American rescue missions that we saw a couple of months ago. And it's the rest of the Afghan population who just didn't have that opportunity, quite frankly, or connections or money, who are still stuck here. So just about everybody I talk to talks of a desire to migrate. There are very few who actually have tickets and visas to other countries, but a lot of people talk about illegal migration and crossing borders trying to get through Iran, Turkey to Europe, for example. And there are some figures that have come out from Iran that show per day that crossing there through that very long border has become incredibly busy. So around 5,000 to 7,000 people, Afghans, it's believed, are crossing into Iran every day. There's also migration on the Pakistani side of the border as well. But as I said, a lot of people just don't have the means to do this legally, to get on a plane and fly to Europe for safety. Most people are going to try to either tough it out or try to get out of the country through other means.
And Soraya, what about the displaced people that are in Kabul? We're hearing reports now that they are actually being shipped out of the city.
That's right. There were thousands of people who were displaced because of the fighting and the Taliban advance, and many fled here to Kabul, of course, for safety, and they ended up in a major park in the Shahrano, in the centre of the city, and they'd been living there for a couple of months now. Over the last few months, we've seen buses arrive to take them back to their provinces, of course, because of this so-called peace. Now that the Taliban has taken over. However, there were a few hundred people who remained, and just this morning, actually, the last buses carrying those people left. It was sponsored by an NGO. The Taliban also was there to provide security and to help get those people on buses, and they were going back to their provinces. The problem is, when you speak to many of these people, they say, well, what are we going back to? Our house was destroyed. We have nothing there. Who's going to look after us? So they're going back maybe to where they're from, but it's an incredibly uncertain situation.
Okay. Soraya Lennie for us there in Kabul. Thanks so much for that. Now, Washington has already frozen almost $9.5 billion belonging to the Afghan central bank. So if the West doesn't come to the Taliban's aid, will it look to its partners in the East? The Taliban has already referred to China as its closest and most important ally. And on Tuesday, during a meeting between the Chinese foreign minister and Taliban leaders in Doha, Beijing called on the U.S. to ease sanctions and help Afghanistan out of this crisis. Well, to talk further about the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, I'm joined now from Kabul by Richard Trenchard, the Afghanistan director for the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. Linda Tom also joins us from the Afghan capital. She's the head of public information at the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And Rahela Sidiqi, former senior social development advisor of UN Habitat Afghanistan. Thanks all so much for being with us. You know, the painful reality is we're hearing of starvation in Yemen and a lack of aid there. There's famine looming in Ethiopia where thousands could also starve. And here is Afghanistan under the rule of a group of people renowned for human rights violations, especially against women and girls. Rahela Sidiqi, should Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis under the Taliban take international priority?
Yes, because Afghanistan faced the biggest humanitarian disasters in the planet, unfortunately. We know that the poverty level now, over 9 million, about 9 million people live in poverty. And the poverty has multi-dimensions, faces, unfortunately. There are multi-dimensions in poverty that people of Afghanistan face. You know that the banking systems are collapsed. There are COVID and there are drought in Afghanistan. The people have been displaced internally. So many people, over 8 million or something, has been displaced internally in Afghanistan. And there are forced displacement that cause poverty as well. There are children and disabled people that they face poverty. Aged people, they face poverty. I think these all these dimensions have been given hand that bring Afghan people to starvations and problems of poverty.
So then, Rahela, what do you say to the people? I have to put this to you. What do you say to the people, you know, who feel that the Taliban will actually use the desperation of its citizens as leverage, and that they will just try to force international recognition through those means? Is that not a legitimate concern?
Well, I would say that there has to be conditions. That first of all, the Taliban, the policy that they are using. For example, if I say that the policy that they use, and they say that only people who are martyred and disabled from the Taliban community, they will receive their entitlement. This is one example, and this is the Article 64 of the policy that the Taliban developed. Published actually. So and girls' education, women's rights, access to work, women's. We know that, and colleagues know here that over 22% of population of the civil servants were women. For example, many women, several women, over 45% or more than that. I don't quote me with the percentage, but women were in factories, women were in sports, women were in many activities, and they were having income. That income has been lost. People who had income through charitable organization, businesses, that income has lost.
Okay.
So how the Taliban can see that the engagement of the populations in to benefit their basic rights. So that condition is so very important that the international community gave this condition for Taliban then to recognize the moment they are a regime of Taliban.
Okay. Let me ask Linda what you think sets Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis at present apart from all the others that the world is facing right now.
Well, thank you. The situation in Afghanistan, as we were just talking about earlier, is increasingly becoming desperate. And the situation was already very difficult for Afghans, as highlighted by the previous speaker. We know that even at the beginning of this year, half the population were in need of humanitarian assistance. This is a huge, huge amount of people who require just basic things in order to survive. And the majority of those people are women and children. So you talk about, all you talk about the Taliban, and you talk about, the previous government, but actually the people who are paying the price for the political upheaval are people.
Right. Let me, Richard, I want to ask you the question along similar lines that I posed to Rahela, because it's also been argued, that there's a potential here that providing aid to Afghanistan with the Taliban in charge could actually cause a repeat of what happened with Saddam Hussein and the UN's Oil for Food program, that the Taliban instead siphons off the money for its own needs rather than getting it to those in need. And then it's really not good for anyone. Do you see any parallels there? Does it concern you as well?
No, I don't, and no, it doesn't. And let me tell you why. Yesterday, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, who I work for, who I lead here in Afghanistan, the World Food Programme, we've just released our 6-monthly food insecurity, our 6-monthly hunger report. It shows what I think every single Afghan man, woman, and child knows. The situation is spiraling into appalling humanitarian crisis. We've now got a situation where 18.8 million, that's 47% of the population, is acutely food insecure. That means they're experiencing hunger on a daily basis. FAO is a technical agency of the United Nations. We're a humanitarian agency. At the moment, our sole focus, our primary focus must be, and I think it's not a single Afghan man, woman, or child would disagree with you, is providing humanitarian assistance to people who desperately need it at the moment. This started off earlier this year, even the end of last year, as a severe drought crisis. We had a La Nina year, as you know, this year. The drought was really bad. It was already affecting millions of people, mainly in rural areas. What we've seen in the last few weeks and months is that this drought crisis has been transformed as a vortex of other pressures, of other crisis drivers that come into play. First and foremost, the economic implosion. And what that means is we've had a rapid collapse on the one hand. Secondly, it's really deepened the level of humanitarian crisis, of the level of hunger across the country has really deepened as well, really quickly. I've been working as a humanitarian around the world for 20 years. I've never seen a situation collapse so quickly. And what's really, really disturbing is that we haven't seen the worst yet. The projections are that by the end of the year, will be over 20 million, 22, almost 23 million. That's 55% of the population, not just in rural areas, increasingly in urban areas too, will be facing hunger on a daily basis. This is not a time just for politics. It's a time for humanitarian response at an unprecedented scale. The people of Afghanistan cannot wait.
Okay, let me ask you this then, Richard, because once aid is secured from abroad, tell us how it gets into the country. Logistically, can it get to the people who need it, especially with, for example, no verified security at the airport right now?
Okay, so let me break that down into three pieces. FAO, our focus is supporting, as farmers and livestock owners, almost all of the goods, the seeds and the livestock feed that we procure, that we acquire and then we deliver, is actually produced locally. So we're working with local Afghan companies because an Afghan field really needs an Afghan seed, and we have really good quality seeds now being produced across the country by the private sector. Some of our goods, such as fertilizers, are imported. So firstly, for a lot of us, it's about working with the private sector that is at the moment is paralyzed by the economic implosion, by the banking restrictions, etc., by the liquidity crisis. And it's not easy, it's not impossible, but it's probably one of the hardest operational contexts that we've worked in. Of course, there's also a lot of humanitarian aid that is also coming in to the country. Food, and our colleagues in the World Food Programme are doing a remarkable job, have been doing all this year, but are really stepping it up. A lot of that food is coming in from outside the country. There are challenges there, but remember, humanitarian assistance is often treated differently to normal non-humanitarian goods as well. So the food is getting in, but they've been working, the teams in Pakistan, particularly in other neighbouring countries, have been working 24/7 to resolve these challenges, and they are succeeding. In terms of what happens once the food arrives or once the humanitarian goods arrived, there are really well-established humanitarian principles, not just here in Afghanistan, around the world. Independence is a key part of that. And let's remember, we've been working, many of us in Taliban areas, for many years now, and the principles of independence and also of evidence-based distributions, that means that we're not just providing, and depending on the situation, but in our case, blanket distribution. We're really looking to target those families most in need, most vulnerable, who are struggling at the moment, whose livelihoods need to be protected, whose lives need to be saved. And it's all about targeting those people. And the principle of independence, of non-interference, is absolutely sacrosanct here, as it is in every other country in the world. We also have, as you can imagine, as we do in other countries, really heavy investment in monitoring systems and tracking those flows, in also contacting the farmers, the households who are receiving those goods, checking they're receiving them, checking what they're receiving.
Richard, I just want to ask you quickly, I mean, we are running a bit short on time, because this is something you alluded to at the beginning of your answer there. So I want to ask you how far you think Afghanistan actually is from being able to properly feed its own population and not be this dependent on international aid. I mean, is the foundation for mass agricultural production there, or are we at the stage now where we're going to see this crisis continually repeat itself if international aid is not getting in?
Look, as they've done countless times in the past, it will be Afghanistan's farmers, it'll be Afghanistan's livestock owners and herders who will bring Afghanistan back from the brink of catastrophe. There is enormous potential here, but at the same time, the systems need to work. At the moment, they're really struggling. And I think, of course, there's a longer term, a much more important, or a really important longer term goal of producing what we would call a sustainable food system. That means that every Afghan person can receive affordable, has access to affordable, healthy food. At the moment, that's not the case. And particularly at the end of 2021, as we look into 2022, it is a long way from the case. For now, there's no real plan B at the moment. People are, as you've seen, and as you've seen, and we've all seen, the situation in both rural areas and in urban areas, it's really, really heading, we're on a countdown to catastrophe. Now is the time where the only real solution in the short term is a massive increase in humanitarian assistance to the people, to the men, to the women, particularly the children of Afghanistan.
Then let me go back to Rahela, because Rahela, given the work that you do with women and girls in Afghanistan, I want you to talk more about the conditions you want to see to ensure that the Taliban isn't somehow unfairly empowered by international aid flowing back in.
If I understand well your questions, I think the Taliban should understand that women are more than half of the population in Afghanistan. Their mothers are women, their sisters are women, their wife are women.
Do you think they will understand that? They've said they will.
They don't understand in terms of having a widow woman in the household that is the breadwinner of the children, and she will die with the children. And there's a very bad news of one of the political people also said in Dashti Barchi, 8 orphans has died because the mother died from cancer and the father died from the heart attack, and the children died from the starving. 8 children in Dashti Barchi in West Kabul has died. So this is one typical example. There might be so many others that people even don't have the news. So they have to understand that Afghanistan has many widows because of this war and because of this, how can I say, unwanted war in Afghanistan and conflict in Afghanistan. There are widows, there are disabled, there are orphans. And they need food, they need works, and education is very important for women, and also their dignity. Women has come along through these 2 decades to be educated and to be in the labor market, to access the finance.
Certainly. And I was asking you, though, at the beginning, if you worry about the Taliban using its own citizens as leverage in order to get financing and aid into the country. I want to ask that in reverse as well. I mean, is there a more positive way, without sacrificing the well-being of the Afghan civilians, that the international community can use that aid as leverage on the Taliban to force them somehow to recognize women and girls' rights in particular, it's your area of specialization, in order to get the aid that they desperately need?
Yeah, that could be, as I said earlier, that could be the conditions. Or alternative approach could be through multilateral channel to be supported, to the populations to be supported. The civilian, the people's need support. As Richard said, humanitarian crisis is unfortunately very bad in Afghanistan right now, and that needs to be managed by the international community at this stage. This is emergency. If Taliban is getting this, international community see this as a leverage to understand the Taliban that legitimacy and government needs to be to understand that all the rights that the government has ratified in Afghanistan, and also the Islamic law doesn't say that the woman should not go to work, women should not have educations. If this is the interpretation of the Taliban, they need to really understand that either they do govern the people to be part of the people, or there has to be conditions, because population should not sacrifice because of the regimes that they don't understand their governance systems.
Linda, let me ask you, as you know, Taliban officials are actually meeting now with some of their Chinese counterparts in Doha. How much do you think that cooperation will be able to change the reality for the Afghan people on the ground? I'm not asking you to comment politically, but as you know, China is a very powerful country, and it is tacitly backing the Taliban. So is there a lot of hope riding on what comes out of these talks and Chinese pressure on Western countries to let this aid money come through?
Well, as humanitarians, what we say is really important is that we need to be able to continue to provide humanitarian assistance and services to the millions of people in Afghanistan who need humanitarian assistance. We know that here in Afghanistan, we see the prices of basic staples like wheat rising week by week. We know that job opportunities are going down. People, both in rural and in urban areas, are suffering. And we're on the brink of a catastrophe here. So we need the entire international community to come together in order to ensure that people and families in Afghanistan get the assistance and the support they need at this very critical time for Afghanistan. And we've talked a lot about the food insecurity crisis that people are facing. But in addition to that, they also need health care. We have hospitals that are not able to operate because salaries haven't been paid, because they don't have enough medicine, they don't have enough healthcare workers. People also need water and sanitation so that
Right.
to prevent them from getting ill. So the services and what is needed is so much more, and they need that continued support over the next couple of months.
Linda, Tom, we'll have to leave it there. I'd like to thank you, Richard Trenchard, and Rahela Sidiqi, all three, for joining us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Great to have you with us, and to our viewers as well, thanks as always for watching. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @the_newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.